Family gatherings are meant to be a time of warmth and connection. But when the invitation for my parents' 20th wedding anniversary arrived, I wasn't filled with excitement. Instead, a familiar wave of dread washed over me. It wasn't because I didn't love my parents, but because I knew my sister, Emily, would be there. Anyone else would jump at the chance to celebrate such a milestone, but for me, the feelings were a tangled mess. The primary source of my apprehension was, and often is, my sister. You see, despite being only 2 years apart, my younger sister, and I have never shared that close, sisterly bond. A significant part of this chasm between us stems from her feelings toward me. She harbors a deep-seated animosity, a resentment that has been brewing since we were children. Growing up, our parents, especially our mother, were incredibly strict. Her years in the military had shaped her worldview, and that disciplined mindset bled into every aspect of our upbringing. She constantly engineered situations that pitted us against each other in competition. It didn't matter if it was a race to the school bus in the morning or a contest to see who could finish their chores first. Our entire childhood felt like one long tournament. It wasn't about simply doing your best. It was about being better than your sister. Initially, I thought this rivalry wasn't so terrible. In some ways, it might have even been healthy. We were just kids, and a bit of competitive spirit seemed normal. However, as the years passed, the dynamic began to sour. Emily started falling behind, most notably in her schoolwork. I had always been academically inclined. I brought home good grades, aced my exams, and delivered report cards that made our parents proud. Unfortunately, my success only magnified Emily's struggles in our mother's eyes. Because I was setting a high bar, my mother's comparisons became more frequent and more harsh. When Emily failed to meet those towering expectations, the consequences were severe. There were nights she was sent to bed without dinner, or times she was forced to stand in a corner for hours until her legs buckled beneath her. I could see the toll it took on her, not just the physical punishment, but the emotional weight of it all. Mom relentlessly used me as the benchmark. "Look at Sarah," she would say, her voice sharp. "Why can't you be more like her?" She even made me her reluctant tutor, convinced that if I just helped her study, her grades would magically improve. I didn't mind trying to help. I genuinely wanted to. But it was nearly impossible to teach someone who was wilting under such immense pressure from our mother. The truth was, Emily didn't enjoy academics. It wasn't her passion. She was a vibrant, active kid who thrived outdoors, running freely and letting her imagination soar. Being forced to sit still with a textbook was a form of torture for her, no matter how much I tried to make it engaging. Over time, the constant comparisons and the relentless pressure began to erode her spirit. She started to resent me deeply, and to be honest, I couldn't blame her. In her eyes, I was the reason she always felt one step behind, perpetually falling short. But I never enjoyed being the focus of our mother's praise. I hated it just as much. Not only did I feel an immense guilt for Emily's suffering, but I also felt the crushing weight of my mother's expectations. Failing a test or falling short myself was not an option. I tried to speak up for Emily, to explain what I was seeing, but my words were dismissed and I was reprimanded for being difficult. Then, just before I left for college, something happened that sent shockwaves through our family. Emily did something drastic. She swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills. By some miracle, our parents found her in time and rushed her to the hospital. The doctors managed to save her, but that single, terrifying moment changed everything. It was as if a blindfold had been ripped from my parents' eyes, especially my mother's. They were forced to confront, for the first time, the immense pain Emily had been hiding, the profound suffering she had endured for years. It took a near tragedy, an event that could have ended in the ultimate catastrophe, for them to finally see the damage that had been festering inside her. After her overdose, the atmosphere at home shifted dramatically. My parents began attending therapy sessions with Emily, trying to unpack the years of trauma. From that point on, they started treating her as if she were made of delicate glass, terrified that one wrong word or the slightest pressure might cause her to shatter all over again. Over the years, I've apologized to my sister countless times. I've expressed my deepest regrets for not seeing the full extent of her pain sooner, for not being a better shield against our mother's relentless demands when we were younger. I've tried to mend the fractured relationship between us. But even now, all these years later, it feels like my parents are still treating her like a fragile child. They're overcompensating for the trauma they inflicted, and I honestly don't believe it's helping her. After high school, when my mother suggested Emily go to college, my sister threatened suicide again, insisting she couldn't handle living away from home and didn't need a degree. As a result, she's never held a stable, well-paying job. Even when she does manage to find employment, she struggles to keep it, either by missing too many days or clashing with her colleagues. It's become a predictable, heartbreaking cycle. My sister still lives at home, rent-free, completely dependent on our parents for everything. Her food, her bills, her daily expenses, they cover it all. To be clear, my sister doesn't have any currently diagnosed mental illnesses beyond the depression she dealt with in her youth. She attends therapy sporadically and by all accounts is doing better now. She's functional. She's not struggling in the same acute way she once was. She even has a group of friends she hangs out with, though they mostly just party. It's not the healthiest crowd, but at least she has a social life. The problem is, she funds this entire lifestyle with our parents' money. That, I think, is what frustrates me the most. My parents never push her, never challenge her, never ask her to take on any real responsibility. They are paralyzed by fear, and I understand why. They're terrified of pushing her too far and triggering another crisis. And she knows this. She knows exactly how to manipulate that fear to her advantage. It often feels like she weaponizes it. So, when they recently asked me to start contributing money to help with their expenses, I had to say no. I know they're retired now, and their income isn't what it used to be. And with Emily contributing nothing, it's obvious their savings are being stretched thin. But I cannot, in good conscience, send them money every month to support a household where my sister lives without a care in the world. Besides that, there are other issues that have made it impossible for me to financially support them, which I'll get into. My husband, David, is fully aware of my family's complicated history. He cannot stand my sister. And his disdain isn't just because she's a freeloader living off our parents. She has also made him deeply uncomfortable on numerous occasions. You see, Emily is relentlessly flirty with my husband. From the very first day she met him, she has been overly familiar. She's constantly trying to get physically close to him, making suggestive comments disguised as jokes. She brushes it off as being light-hearted or just friendly. When I confront her about it, she laughs, downplays the situation, and acts as if I'm the one being ridiculous. What makes the entire situation infinitely worse is how my parents react. They don't see her behavior for what it is. Instead of telling Emily to back off or supporting me, they dismiss it entirely. They call it an innocent crush, like she's some silly teenager. At times, they even make subtle remarks that seem to encourage her. For example, the first time David met my parents, we were all sitting and chatting. Out of nowhere, my mom turned to David, who was just my boyfriend at the time, and said something like, "You're so funny. You know, you'd actually be a much better match for my other daughter, Emily. You two have the exact same sense of humor." My father then chimed in, nodding in agreement. He told David, "Yeah, Emily's a real card. Someone like her would probably be more fun for you." David and I were so taken aback that we just tried to laugh it off, assuming they had to be kidding. But over the years, this theme has persisted. My parents have repeatedly brought up how David would have been a better fit for my sister. It's a recurring narrative they refuse to let go of. They'll say, "He's so much more like Emily," or comment on their supposed similar personalities, as if to imply he chose the wrong sister. Even on our wedding day, moments before the ceremony, my mother pulled David aside and asked him, "Are you absolutely sure you want to marry Sarah?" It felt like she was giving him one last escape route, hoping he'd have a change of heart and leave me at the altar. Can you imagine the devastation of hearing that on what should have been the happiest day of my life? I had a massive fight with my parents over it and cut contact with them for a while. They eventually apologized and promised never to speak to David that way again. But then, for my sister's next birthday, they tried to orchestrate photos, insisting David stand right next to her. David simply refused, and we left before they even cut the cake. We knew then that our parents were never going to change. After that incident, my mom tried to rationalize it, saying that since Emily has never had a boyfriend, she just has a harmless crush on David because he's handsome and she enjoys his company. She even suggested that being around him more might motivate her to become better and find someone like him for herself. My father is no better. He'd say things like, "What's the harm in standing next to her for one picture if it makes your sister happy?" We stopped attending family gatherings if we knew my sister would be there. No more birthdays, no more parties. We completely distanced ourselves. Both David and I stopped visiting our parents. However, my mother is insisting we come this time, for the anniversary, because she's invited the entire extended family and doesn't want our absence to raise questions. But I already know how it will play out. My sister will be there, and neither of us, especially David, has any desire to go. While her behavior infuriates me, I wouldn't have married him if I thought he'd ever leave me for someone like her. The issue is the profound disrespect toward me. My husband is uncomfortable, and his comfort is our priority. I would enjoy seeing some of my distant relatives, but it's just not worth the inevitable drama. I'm not writing this to ask for advice on whether to go, but more to vent about my family and process the childhood memories this invitation has dredged up. Update 1. First, I want to thank everyone who commented on my post. I truly didn't expect anyone to read it. After we discussed the invitation, my husband brought up a valid point that made me reconsider. He argued that if we don't go, my parents will just invent some excuse for our absence, painting us in a bad light. He suggested that we should go, and if my sister or parents cross a line, it would be the perfect opportunity to confront them in front of everyone. That way, There would be no room for them to spin a different story to our relatives later. I'm not saying it's a flawless plan, but I'm considering it because it could either resolve things or go catastrophically wrong. Update 2. Well, we decided to attend my parents' anniversary party, and I believe the outcome was, ultimately, a positive one. When we arrived, my parents were visibly thrilled to see us. My mother embraced me, saying she was so relieved I had come. I just managed a polite nod and a tight smile. Everything was surprisingly calm until dinner. We were all seated, making small talk and catching up. Then, one of my aunts casually remarked that all of her kids and my other cousins were married or in serious relationships, except for Emily. She chuckled and asked my sister, in a half-joking tone, why she was still single and if there was anyone special in her life. Emily just smiled awkwardly and blushed, as if she were harboring a secret. That's when another cousin playfully yelled, "Come on, Emily, spill it. You got someone hidden away." Without missing a beat, my mother announced loudly, "Oh, I don't know about a boyfriend, but she has a massive crush on her sister's husband." She pointed directly at David and giggled like a schoolgirl. My father joined in, laughing even harder. I shot my mother a death glare from across the table, but she was too engrossed in her performance to notice. Then my aunt turned to my husband and asked, just as carelessly, "Well, do you have any brothers or cousins for Emily to date?" A few family members chuckled. My sister just stood there, blushing and smiling softly, soaking up the attention as if it were a compliment. She made no effort to stop them or change the subject. I felt a hot flush of anger rise in my cheeks, but I took a deep breath. We had anticipated this. I was ready. I planned to say my piece loud and clear for everyone to hear. I stood up and turned to my mother, my voice ringing out, "How dare you speak about my husband that way?" The entire table fell silent. I continued, "You promised me. Both of you promised that you would not cross this line again. You swore you would respect our boundaries, but here you are, laughing about my sister having a crush on my husband. You think it's funny because you are just as pathetic as she is." Then, I addressed the entire table. "Let me ask all of you a question. How many of you think it's acceptable for someone to openly fantasize about their own sibling's partner, and for the whole family to treat it like a sitcom? Do you honestly think this is normal behavior?" Suddenly, no one knew what to say. I then turned my attention to my sister. "You have been acting like a creep toward my husband for years. You flirt with him constantly. You send him inappropriate late-night texts, even though he's never once responded and has asked you to stop. You try to touch him when he is visibly uncomfortable, and you play it all off as a joke." My sister's face fell. I looked around at my relatives again. "And you all find this amusing. You think it's okay for someone to behave this way toward their brother-in-law." I locked eyes with my parents. "And you too. How many times have you suggested David and Emily would make a better couple? You've been pushing this sick narrative for years. You even said it on our wedding day. Do you have any idea how twisted and disrespectful that is? Not just to me, but to my husband." Everyone sat in stunned silence. I looked directly at my aunt, who had gone along with my mother's joke. "Would you ever say things like this about your own daughter's husband? Would you tell your son-in-law he'd be a better match for someone else? Would you allow your daughter to act this way?" She looked shocked and slowly shook her head. "Exactly," I said. "That's what I thought, so why is it okay when it happens to me?" My father's face was turning a deep shade of red. His fists were clenched on the table, but before he could speak, I cut him off. "Don't you dare say a word." That's when my husband, who had practiced his part of this confrontation, stepped forward and addressed my mother. "Oh, I see now. Since we're all making jokes, I guess your affair with the neighbor years ago was just for laughs too, right? I think it's time. We all had a good laugh about that." "Come on, everyone, start laughing," he said, motioning to the silent room. My mother froze, her eyes wide with horror. David pressed on. "I mean, I suppose you had an innocent crush on the neighbor, didn't you? And I guess when you slept with him, it didn't mean anything. It was all just for fun, wasn't it?" What David said was the absolute truth. It was a dark family secret they had buried for years. My mother had cheated on my father with a neighbor. When my father found out, she begged him not to leave for the sake of me and my sister. He stayed, and it seemed he had forgiven her, or at least buried it. But I knew the truth, and I had told David. He had kept that secret for years, but before the dinner he asked if he could use it as ammunition if they pushed him too far. My response was, "Unload the entire clip." My mother, snapping out of her shock, started screaming at my husband, her joking demeanor gone. She shrieked that he had no right, that he had crossed a line. My father jumped to her defense, calling David disrespectful and vile. But I was ready to defend my husband. I told them, "You crossed the line the moment you made my husband the punchline of your sick jokes. The moment you continued to defend Emily as if she's a harmless child when she has been making my husband uncomfortable for years. It is creepy that a grown woman has a fixation on her brother-in-law. She's not a kid. She's a semi-functional adult who needs a serious wake-up call." My mother burst into tears, a pathetic attempt to garner sympathy from the room, to paint herself as the victim. But the gears were turning in people's minds, connecting her earlier comments with the revelation of her infidelity. Finally, Emily found her voice, yelling at me for ruining the party. "You always make yourself the victim," I shot back at her. "None of this would be happening if you hadn't been sitting there like a trained seal, lapping up the attention while Mom announced your creepy crush to the world. You didn't say a word. You blushed like a schoolgirl. Are you mad at me? Good, because your anger means less than nothing to me." She retorted, "Oh, please, nobody said anything that bad." As my parents, and Emily descended into a chaotic mess of screaming and blaming. David and I decided it was time to leave. We had accomplished our mission. There was no point in staying. I looked at them one last time and said, "It's over. Don't you dare contact us again unless you're ready to grow up and take responsibility. If not, don't bother calling when one of you dies." That was it. In the days that followed, family members sent supportive texts. Even my aunt apologized. In the end, it turned out far better than I could have imagined. I had to admit, my husband was right. It was better to rip the Band-Aid off all at once. Update 3. The aftermath has been eerily quiet. I expected a barrage of calls from my parents, but I've only received a couple that went straight to voicemail. I suspect they're so humiliated that they're afraid to say anything that might make it worse. I listened to the messages. Their tone was subdued, a stark contrast to their fury at the party. I get it. They're terrified we might detonate another truth bomb, but we've already said everything. We held nothing back. Sure, we could have been more delicate, but in the heat of the moment, the raw truth came out. Looking back, I have no regrets. After leaving the party, we were starving, so we stopped at a fast food drive-thru. We had a surprisingly great time rehashing the entire night over burgers and fries. Update 4. Nearly 6 months have passed. First, despite cutting off all contact, Emily began sending bizarre and unwanted love letters to my husband. We threatened police involvement, but she didn't stop. Then, about a month ago, David and I received the most wonderful news. We're expecting a baby. We were ecstatic and shared the news on social media, which turned out to be a grave mistake. Earlier this week, things took a terrifying turn. When David got home from work, he found Emily sitting on our front porch, waiting for him. As soon as she saw his car, she started to get up. Feeling immediately threatened, he put the car in reverse and started to back away as she sprinted towards him, begging him to stop and talk. He was terrified. He called me and I raced home. We immediately called the police. Because we had already filed reports about the letters, they took it seriously. They arrested her, and she spent a few days in jail until my parents bylaid her out. We also filed for a restraining order. We learned from our lawyer that defending her in a criminal trial could cost our parents between $10,000 and $20,000, maybe more. This brought us a small sense of vindictive satisfaction. If my parents refused to hold her accountable, then the justice system and its associated costs would. Update 5. It's been a long time, but I promised an update, and so much has happened. Shortly after we got the restraining order, Emily violated it by trying to approach my husband again. This caused my parents to lose their bail money. Second, Emily lost her case at trial. I don't know the exact figure, but my parents had to pay for a private lawyer, which couldn't have been cheap. Emily ended up serving a 6-month sentence and was ordered to attend mandatory therapy for an indefinite period. Third, my parents got divorced. It seems my father finally found his backbone. The combination of public humiliation from the affair revelation, the financial strain of Emily's legal battles, and the town-wide embarrassment was the final straw. My mother now has custody of Emily, so to speak. They live together. Both of them have had to go back to work as their savings were depleted. Fourth, our extended family has completely shunned them, refusing to lend them money and blocking them on social media. Fifth, everyone in our small town now knows the whole story. As a result, my mother and Emily had a hard time finding a new place to live after losing their house in the divorce. My father moved out of state, while my mother and Emily moved a few towns over, as Emily is not allowed to leave the state as part of her probation. Sixth, our life is immeasurably happier and more peaceful. With a restraining order and a criminal record, even Emily isn't foolish enough to risk more jail time. And seventh, I am fully embracing the joys of motherhood, grateful for the peace we fought so hard to win.